Well, hey there, Susan here. I hope you're having an amazing day. I am deeply honored to share this episode with you with Gregory Shepard. Gregory Shepard, you may know him. He is an amazing venture capitalist. He has grown and scaled 12 companies and had exits totaling almost $1 billion for all of them. He has done business with eBay and all sorts of amazing companies. And he's a TED Talk speaker and incredible. He's an author. What you may not know is that he is neurodivergent, or he is, as he would say, autistic. And so in this episode, Gregory and I have a heart-to-heart conversation about being bullied. We talk about what it's like to be different, to learn different, and how he managed to figure out a way and be very resourceful where a lot of people wouldn't. This episode's very special to me because my son is on the autism spectrum. So if you have someone in your life or a friend, a family member who is neurodivergent, please share this episode with them. This show is for all of you. And on another note, I have been reading about all of the layoffs. Citibank, 20,000 people. I know Waymo has laid people off. eBay has laid people off. And the list goes on and on and on. And already in January of 2024, there are over 24,000 tech layoffs alone. And so if that's you or you're nervous about your job, I would just say, stay tuned, keep plugging into the show, go listen to past episodes. We have 12-year-old founders. We have founders in their 70s. We have founders in their 20s. These stories are here to teach you how to start a business, how to scale a business, how to have the courage to do it. We have had so many different types of founders and founders who built multiple six-figure Etsy businesses, for goodness sake. And the show is designed that whatever it is that lights your soul on fire, you can turn it into a business. So my goal for this show is that it will inspire you, it will motivate you, it will teach you the how-tos, and it'll be something for you to be able to light that spark that turns into your business. So I want to thank you all for being here. And my other question for you is, how is your branding doing? Because one of the things we always want to do as an entrepreneur is we need to be a brand. And so take a look at your LinkedIn, your Instagram, your X, whatever it is, whatever social platforms you're on, and ask yourself, how does it look? And if you think it could be better, then go to agency8.com. For as little as a few $100s, they can get you set up with a video, with a professional banner, with your descriptions. We even have social media coaching there, website building. So go to agency8.com. It's your one-stop shopping as an entrepreneur to get you kickstarted with your brand. And full disclosure, I started that agency. I no longer run the agency, but the gals over there are absolutely amazing. And if you're wondering what their work looks like, look at my LinkedIn, look at my X, look at all of it. They did all of those brands. They do all of my videos. So if you've ever seen one of my videos, they do that. They even do the production on this show. So they're amazing. Agency8.com. Go check it out. And so with that, let's get into this episode with the amazing Gregory Shepard.
This is Raw and Real Entrepreneurship, the show that brings the no-nonsense truth of what is required to start, grow, and scale your business. I am your host, Susan Sly.
All right. So first and foremost, happy anniversary, 20 years. Gregory, seriously, we were talking before. I wanted to start recording. We had it recorded, but you were telling the story of getting engaged with your wife. Can you share that with everyone?
Yeah, so I had only two girlfriends, and because I'm not very good at talking to girls, especially, but pretty much a lot of people. But anyway, so we were I went to this trade show with my friend, and then she was just walking across the area, and I told my friend, like, that's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. And he's like good looking. And so he was going to go over there. And I was like, please, just this one time, just let me talk to a girl, you know? And so he walked over there and introduced me to her. And then um, I spent the whole day with her. And then the next weekend I flew her up. And then the next weekend I drove down and asked her to marry me. So it was like 4 dates. And
Okay.
that was 20 years ago.
Okay. So those 4 dates, like I have many questions about this. This is raw and real entrepreneurship, but there's, we've had founders, Gregory, who've shared very vulnerably about being incredibly nervous to even talk to people. And we've had other founders who've gotten over they've had different learning differences. We've had young founders who are 12, we have like all these different groups of founders. But what I really want to know, as a woman, as a wife, what did you do on those dates that was so special that she said yes after 4 days?
Well, I
Keep it
didn't.
PG though.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, yeah, it would be anyway. Uh, I'm very real, like most autistic people. I am who I am 100%, and I can't be anything else. And I
Mhm.
think that that was like something that she was just, never ran into before. And I told her everything. She asked a question, I told her the truth, whether I didn't care if it was going to make her run off or not. I was just like, this is everything. And she really appreciated it. And she's really candid and she's really smart and she's what we call a normie,
Mhm.
because and she was really, she likes the autism culture. She likes the feeling of it because we're so genuine.
Mhm.
Like we have a hard time not saying things that aren't 100% real because it's just illogical and a waste of time. Um, and so I think that that attracted her. And at the time, I was still building. So I've built 12 companies and sold 12 companies. And I was building one this time without any investment capital. Like it was just me. And so this is the crazy thing is when we met, I was living in a studio apartment. I had computers all the way around the whole room with duct tape with wires going all over the place. And I had a chair and I would just roll around this like circle with all these computers, working all these computers. At the same time, this is when computers weren't like now where you could multitask. The power wasn't there. I had to have a bunch of them. Um, and so I was just rolling around working, all the time. And we were sleeping on an air mattress and it would go flat in the middle of the night and wrap around us like a taco. And I would have to get off and pump it up and stuff. And she didn't care about any of that. And then, I sold a couple companies to eBay, won 4 private equity awards for transactions between 250 million and a billion, became the chief strategy officer for eBay Enterprise and then chief technology officer. And then we did a carve out of eBay companies, um, 14 companies and bought more and then sold, merged them all together and flipped that a couple times. And, then our life changed substantially in terms of financially, but outside of that, it's the same, like, just, just trying to do the best I can to help this little world that we're all sharing together, you
Mm.
know?
There's so much to that story because in my research on you, that you are that person who, from the venture side, or to your point, you've built and sold 12 companies, that you're with you, when you say something, you're just speaking your truth. There's no nuance to it. There's no agenda behind it. Would you say that is your superpower?
I think that I think that it is a superpower for sure. Like when my diagnosis, I have this thing called savant syndrome. I hate the way they say syndrome. I don't know why they have to put that on there, but anyway, it means that I have high levels of intelligence in certain areas. Like if you ever saw that movie Rain Man, he's like
Mm-hmm.
a savant. 10% of autistics are savants, but you could only be a savant if you're autistic. So the honesty part of it is just something that I feel like uh, in my life, certain things that are illogic make me crazy, like sarcasm. Like, why would you make a joke trying to say the opposite thing of what you actually want to say, and then that's funny? I don't understand that.
Me
So,
neither. Yeah. I,
so
we at our house, when my husband or our oldest daughter are sarcastic, I don't like it. Like I'll even say, I don't like that kind of humor. I don't find it funny. They find it hilarious, but my son and I absolutely don't find it funny at all.
yeah, yeah, it's like what it's not a clear form of communication. And so, we already struggle with this like understanding communication thing. So I think my way of being super honest and genuine and straightforward and like this is it is because it's the most efficient way to communicate. It's really what it comes down to. It's like
Mhm.
that's efficient. Otherwise you're tangling up things and people are trying to unravel stuff and it just seems like why? Just why?
From that perspective, when thinking about, I want to journey back to your childhood because you've mentioned being autistic. Some people now would say neurodivergent, and then we struggled a long time. We knew our son was not a quote unquote normie, and we're madly in love with him. We saw his gifts. He didn't walk until after he was 3. He couldn't do simple math at the Montessori school. He didn't read until later. He had different gifts. And when he finally was diagnosed, Gregory, it was on the spectrum. It is
Yeah,
a big darn spectrum. And
huge.
so
Yeah.
and he's 21. And so going back in time to your childhood and navigating school, which was not then, and still to a certain extent is not designed for children who are outside of the norm, quote unquote.
Yeah.
What was your earliest recollection of, hey, I think differently than other people in
Oh
this
man.
class?
Since I was as far as I could remember. But I mean,
Mm,
school for me was a nightmare. I went to like 9 high schools, and I got beat up all the time, like really beat up, like kicked laying down, like where they were stomping me and punching me. And so I would defend myself sometimes. And then because I wasn't talking very much, I wouldn't defend myself when they would pull you into the dean's room and then they would blame it on me and I didn't say anything. And so I would get kicked out of school. Um, and then I finally barely graduated from high school. And it wasn't until after that that I started to really see, like, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Everybody else sees the world this way. I see it this way. And that's an advantage. And when I was young,
mm.
I was selling Rubik's cubes at school. I was selling rattlesnakes. I used to catch rattlesnakes and sell them to pet stores. Um, I would sell mice and rats to the store that I would sell the rattlesnakes for to feed the rattlesnakes. Um, I mean, I had little businesses going on. We were poor, like we went from there's different ethnicities in my family, adopted and fostered. And so there was a lot of different types of people, and a lot of different races and stuff. And so, we lived in tents for 2 years while we built our own house. It's a very unusual. My mom was a nun. My dad was a priest. They met in the church and left and foster and adopted. So it's a very unusual childhood growing up. And I was a medical baby. I was in the hospital all the time until I was like 14 with all kinds of issues. Um, and so it was very tough. But what I think what that does is it gives you a perspective of life that gives you a lot of gratitude for the things that you have because you understand what happens when some things are just taken away from you. Like I read at a fourth grade level, I wrote a book that's getting published by a real publisher on September 24th on startups from a research project I did, which was the biggest research on why, when, and how founders fail. That took 5 years, and I'm dyslexic level 5, right? And so if that doesn't tell people that are listening that you can do things you don't think you can, I don't know what does. You know?
Yeah, and I want to dive into your perspective on why startups fail.
Okay.
But before I do, because I'm a very literal conversationalist and a very curious person, and I do not like snakes. I want to know. I like Rubik's cubes. Hey, I'm in my 50s. I'm down. What was the logic like? I'm going to catch and sell snakes because of the 362 founders I've interviewed on the show, Gregory, about their early childhood businesses, snake selling, you're the very first. So, what was the logic? How did you think to do that?
Well, so we lived in Oakland, California during the 80s, which is like an active war zone. I mean, the place is dangerous, right? And so my mom sold our house and bought property, and that's why we camped on the land because she was trying to get us out of there because we kept getting like beat up all the time. And
Mm,
especially me, like, just, I had my nose broken. I don't know how many times, my teeth knocked out, you know,
Mm.
really not good stuff. So then what happened was is we were camping and there were rattlesnakes because we were camping on the land and we were, and I was like, huh. So I went to the pet store and I was like, hey, do you guys buy rattlesnakes? And the guy's like, hold on, come to the back door because it's like a black market item. So he's like, we'll buy the rattlesnakes. We'll use the venom for anti-venom and then we'll clip the fangs and sell them as exotic pets. And I was like, how much do you pay for the rattlesnakes? And he's like, for this size, 200, for this size, whatever, whatever. I was like, holy crap, they're all over the place. So I went home and I did some engineering and I took a long green stick and I cut it in the middle. So it sort of like spliced it, but then a green stick wants to close. So then I put a little twig in between and then I would come up behind the rattlesnake and like pin its head and the twig would break and it would snap shut and pin it and then I could come up behind and grab it and throw it in a bag, you know? And then I would bring it to the bring the bag like a feed bag, like a burlap sack, and I would bring that to the pet store.
Oh my gosh. Okay. How much money did you make doing that?
I bought my first car doing it. I bought my clothes, my shoes. Um, I don't, one time I found a mama and there was a whole bunch of babies and I was trying to catch her without hurting her, but she ended up hurting herself and a rock fell on her and then she killed herself but I put her in the bag and all the babies came out and I had like a jackpot and because all the babies came out of her when she hurt herself. And so I had all these and I was like, oh, I got it. I made enough to like really I bought new tires for my car and it was like pretty cool.
You are, I mean, you're amazing just from everything people can read online. It's just there's so much within that story of ingenuity, of there's in Sun Tzu, The Art of War, when I was growing up, Gregory, I was raised by a single dad, and I had like you come from poverty and social assistance and so forth,
Hmm.
and I learned differently, and there were certain things I'd latch on to and certain things that just I was not very interested in, to be very candid.
Yeah.
But when I think of there's my dad gave me The Art of War, the book, and I remember this one Master Su says, he says, adapt to your terrain. And the big story there for you is this is your terrain. We're camping. There are all these rattlesnakes. Okay, I'm going to make something of this. And that is, to your credit, building, scaling, selling 12 businesses. The theme I see as another superpower is you're able to look at whatever your terrain is and make something of what it is you have.
That's very smart. Yeah, you're really smart. That I didn't think about it that way, but I am extremely resourceful.
Mm.
When I was young, also I raised livestock. So I went around to the whole neighborhood and I asked everybody, would you like some organic pigs, chickens, stuff like that, right? And they said yes. So I said, okay, give me a deposit. And then I would go buy the animals and raise them all year and then sell them to them as meat. I'd hire somebody to come in and I didn't like this because I don't want to hurt any animal. I don't even eat meat myself. Um, but I was selling pork futures. I didn't even know, I didn't even know what I was doing, but I was selling this and I made a lot of money doing that too. And the Rubik's cubes, man, I started off just because I was like this little lone nerd and I would just sit there ramming out these Rubik's cubes. And everybody was like, whoa, how do you do that? And so I would say, well, give me your Rubik's cube. And they would say, I don't have one. Oh, so I'll sell you one. And then after I sell it to you, I'll show you how to solve it. Um, and then I was making money doing that, and I had these like things going on since I was a kid, I mean, like 10 years old, even younger. Um, and, I used to climb up trees and knock down, mistletoe during Christmas and put them in sandwich bags and sell them in front of the grocery store for 50 cents to buy Christmas presents for my siblings and my parents. So it's kind of like always the adapting to your terrain thing, to your point, is always there. And it's what I'm doing now too, you know? So And I went off that rail a little bit after eBay. I went and became a chairman for a couple congressional candidates trying to get women and people of color into Congress. Um, and I got to meet Barack Obama a couple times. He's like so cool. And he gave me a hug and he said he liked my beard and I love him. And like that was outside of my wheelhouse, because, well, as long as they can lie and money's in the game, it's pretty hard to change things.
Mhm.
And then I left and went back into my wheelhouse. So I did step off of my terrain for a minute and it didn't work. So to your point, I think that's some good advice for people.
I think it, from what I'm hearing, it did work. And I appreciate what you said as a right now in my current startup. And I can't disclose yet, but I've been invited to apply to a DEI startup accelerator with a very large company. And my friend is the chief diversity officer at that company. And they're not just talking about DEI, they're actually living it. And
Yeah.
I was just at Consumer Electronics Show and I got to spend some time with Julie Su, who's the Secretary of Labor for the United States. And we were talking about female founders and women in their 50s and women like myself who are, diverse. And that piece, I think this is a perfect place to jump in. I mean, the you're not and I'm not what people think of when they think of Silicon Valley founder, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the question that's really on my heart to ask you is, what is it going to take for the data to change? Right now, less than 2% of female-led startup pitches to VCs get funded,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
what is it going to
It's
take,
even worse.
Gregory?
If you're a black female, it's 0.006%. Can you imagine that?
As a brown female, yeah, I know what it's like, and
Yeah.
I get asked different questions than males get asked.
Yeah. That's not cool. Yeah. I mean, it makes me really sad, because we all have the same hardware, right? And it's just the software, right? So,
I've
um,
never heard it referred to like that before.
yeah, like regardless of our pigmentation or our gender or whatever our belief patterns are, we all come with the same hardware. It's like buying a Mac. Everybody's Mac is the same, like pretty much, right? So, and what we do in our life and how we shape our brains through neuroplasticity and that sort of thing we create our own software. So
Mm,
when people discriminate against somebody for gender, or for their age or for their disability, whether they're even blind people or deaf people, like everybody, we have the same hardware. We just learn different. We process information. We have receptors that like intake of data, eyes, ears, your senses
yeah.
that take in data. The fact that somebody discriminates against one brain over another brain, it just baffles me. I just can't wrap my head around it. I don't understand why they would hurt their own selves. Uh, I don't get it. It's not in the realm of logic. It's completely ill. It's against logic, you know?
It is against logic. And
Yeah.
especially for you, you've done 5 years of research. You know what a success, like we use the word success very broadly, right?
Hmm.
But let's call success as a startup that is able to have a liquidity event.
Hmm.
You've done so much research. So what does your research tell you about what it
Oh
takes?
my God. Okay, so I like this. This is fun. Thank you for asking that. So the first thing was I was trying to figure out the first thing I was trying to figure out is where in the life cycle should I participate? And the first thing I
Good
found out is that
question.
there was no life cycle. Like
Okay.
everybody was guessing everybody's version of a life cycle is when they get funding. But
Mhm.
that's something that happens during the life cycle. That is not the life cycle because everybody calls rounds different things. It has to do with where your company is.
Yeah.
So I came up with 7 stages in the life cycle. It goes from vision, and then it goes from vision to product, from product to go to market, from go to market to standardization, then optimization, then growth, then exit. And the reason
Mm.
why I put it in that order had to do with the data that I found. 57.1% of founders fail within the first 18 months. And the majority of the founders that fail over the following years are failing for the things they did in the first 18 months. So that told me that I needed to focus on the first 18 months, like that for the early stage. I needed to really drill in, and in order to affect change over time, I had to focus on that beginning area. So in the life cycle, that's like the vision all the way up to when you start getting into standardization. And the reason why it goes go to market, standardization, optimization, and growth is because the majority of the founders skip over standardization and optimization. They go straight to growth because the investors are telling them to, and then they put
Mm.
themselves out of business. They essentially grow before they're ready and before their business is adapted to that kind of a scaling issue. And then they over expense their own selves, or they flood themselves with business. They can't get around. Everything goes wrong. Like, so there's this really delicate period. So, as an example, if you're a founder and you go to market, there is no like go to market. There's pre go to market. There's preparing to go to market. And then after you go to market, you can't just focus on sales. You have to focus on what's behind it because it works like a waterfall, right? Like you have marketing that goes to sales, sales go to service, and service hits operations. And in between is your product. So when you're thinking about that with this life cycle, you have to say, okay, well, when you're going from go to market, you have to standardize. And what standardization is just documenting, and I don't mean like super fancy technical writing, but documenting how and what happens in your business. It starts
Mm.
out with your functional areas. So there in every business, regardless of the type of business, there's four primary functional areas. There's sales and marketing, there's service and support, there's operations or shared services, and then there's product and engineering. That's what there is, right? So if you then think about what are the valuation drivers, what are the things that drive shareholder value for a business, it's always three things: growth, margin, and retention, right?
Mhm.
So if you have your functional areas set up and align those functional areas to the valuation drivers, then you have somebody on their head that's effectively changing the value of the company. So if for like sales and marketing, that's growth. Service and support or service delivery or service in that area, service in general, that's retention. And operations is margin. And product and engineering goes across all four. So now what you've done is you've aligned your business with your functional areas. That's part of standardization. Then you go to those functional area leaders and you say, what are the key performance indicators, the leading, not the lagging key performance indicators? Most people run their business off of lagging, which is like financials. But those financials were put in business like they were started like maybe a year ago. So if you're like sitting there going, "Oh, let me look at the financials," it's like driving down the freeway looking at the rear view mirror, right? So you
Mhm.
have to look at what's creating the financials. So you have to look at the whole stack. So what's marketing doing to generate leads? What's sales doing to convert those leads? What's service doing to get attachment, engagement, et cetera, on those leads? And then how is product and engineering affecting the whole funnel? And how's operations supporting the business?
Mm.
So you have, when you look at those indicators, you have leading indicators which cause financials. If it's a financial number or a solid number that's stagnant, that isn't in flux, then that is a lagging indicator. If it's a leading indicator and it changes those lagging indicators, that's how you know it's a leading indicator. And to make sure that what I did is everybody talks about KPIs and everything, but really the logic is that KPIs need to line up with your financials. So if you look at your financials, you have expense and income. So you have expense KPIs and you have income KPIs. And then you have lag and lead. And then you have KPIs for every functional area that feeds the valuation drivers, that creates the valuation drivers. That happens in the standardization phase. So in addition to that, if you're sitting there and you're like, okay, what I do is I sit down with somebody. I'm like, can you just show me your job? And I do what's called shadowing, and I watch them do their job. And I say, okay, now write it down exactly. I go here, then I click this, then I do this, then I do that. It's real simple. And in the standardization phase, you start out by saying, what is the functional area that's accountable for this particular thing? And then what do they do? How do they do it? And when do they do it? So when is the trigger? That could be a calendar event or when you receive an email or when you get a task or something like that. And then what you do is the best practice. That's how you go about it. And then that's it. That explains what it is. Now that you have that, you move on to optimization. That's where you go back and look at your operations and you see if they're going to scale when you go into growth before you go into growth.
Mm,
So an example is 33% of if you hire somebody, typically it's cost you 33% of their first year's salary to get them up to 75% productivity. Okay.
mm,
So if you're hiring and you go straight from go to market to growth and you haven't done standardization optimization, 10 people at 100 grand a piece, that's 33,000, right? So it's a lot of money and you can see how people can put themselves out of business. Instead, you go back and you reduce the time to productivity. So you say instead of 6 months to productivity, it takes 3 months to productivity or a month, and they're not impacting the rest of the company, and they're following standardization practices that are the same regardless, so that your KPIs work. If three
mm,
people are doing things differently, your numbers are trash. But if they're doing all of the same way, then your numbers align and you can go back and optimize and optimize. When you get it optimized, then you say, okay, now let's hit down the accelerator. Because otherwise, what you're doing is you're making the problems that you're aware of and the problems you're not aware of, you're inflating the problem. You're adding more to it by adding more customers, right? So this is a ton of, they put themselves out of business. It's really breaks your heart when you like see the data and you're like, it's like people falling off a escalator into a hole, and you're like, oh my God, look at this. This is incredible. Like these people. So that's why the life cycle is set up that way, is because it guides you through and prevents you from making these mistakes in the first place.
the what I'm as I'm tracking along. So, for those of you who are listening only, and you're not seeing our interview, I always write notes, and Gregory was going so fast that I was writing super fast. But thank goodness
Sorry,
we
sorry.
no, don't apologize, because I was like, I'm just going to stop writing. I always listen to the show anyway, and then we have show notes. So, what as I was tracking along, one of the thoughts that I had amongst several was the compounding of lack of productivity, because that is exponential. It's not linear.
Yeah.
And the data shows too that, one non-productive employee, that if they're in a leadership role or you're doing agile methodology or whatever, that is going to compound the lack of productivity amongst the rest of the team. And what companies do, and I've seen this before, is they'll hire people to fill in the lack of productivity, which costs them more money, as opposed to going back to standardization and saying, how do we optimize our productivity standards? Oh my gosh. Okay. I have
Yeah.
a lot of
When I went
questions,
into
but
eBay, like I'll tell you, when we did this transaction, right? And I went in there and there were so many people doing nothing. It was crazy. We laid off like, I don't even hundreds. And they hated me. But when you put the thing together, you could see it, right? And it also makes it so that nobody can hide. Like a lot of people don't like standardization and KPIs because, they want to hide. But if you put that in place, people can't hide. It's like right there. It's like
yeah.
right there. And more than anything, it gives you the ability to diagnose, right? If you're a doctor and you're trying to diagnose and you have 100 patients that have similar issues, but they're all eating different things, they're all doing different things, it's really hard to diagnose the issue. But if all the patients are eating the same thing and have the same program, it's really easy to diagnose. And that's what standardization does.
Mhm. I, what I, so I wrote down that the failure rate after the first 18 months is directly related to what happened in the first 18 months. So I want to
Yeah.
go back to the new founder.
Okay.
So the founder that is pre-revenue, they're pre MMP, they're just getting their team together, they're building out their POV. What advice do you give them? Because they might listen and go, well, we're not at revenue yet, so we don't have the lagging indicators, we don't
Yeah.
even know, we're just in the ideation phase. What advice to the early founder to set them up for success?
So like if you're when you're starting a business, this is something that's really critical, is that you have to understand your ecosystem. You have to understand what is in your world. So
Mhm.
the first thing I teach them is you need to understand who your competitors are, who your partners are, who your customers are. That's your ecosystem. And so in the platform that we built, that it gives them that data because we were having them learn it on their own. And then I was like, I'm just going to integrate software and then make it so it does it for them. Because it takes them too long and they make a lot of mistakes. But once you understand that, then what you need to do is you need to say, okay, start with the end in mind. When you're building a startup, you have to know where you are and where you're going, like a GPS, right? So
Mhm.
where you're going is an exit. So start by looking at who are the possible acquirers. And then you say, what companies have they bought? How much did they pay? And what do their customers look like? Companies buy companies, a synergy, right? Companies buy companies to save or make money. Most of the time, it's to make money. And the reason why is because they have already absorbed a customer acquisition cost. So some big corporate or whatever has thousands, tens of millions, maybe millions of customers, and they've already paid for those customers. So how do they make money? By increasing their lifetime value. How do they do
Yeah.
that? By selling them other products. So if your product doesn't align with their customers, you're not going to have an exit. This is something I tell people so much, and they don't listen, and they get all the way out to the end, and then they're trying to find a buyer. It doesn't work like that. You have to have a buyer when you start. So if you think about this, right, that you start with the exit and everybody argues with me until I tell them the logic behind that. If some company is buying your product to sell to their customers, then you're really just a product. They're just buying a product, right?
Mhm.
If your product doesn't meet their customers, it's just like your product not meeting your customers, which means you have to have the same customer. And the logic is, would you ever build a product without having a customer? Well, that's like dumb, right? I mean, no, you don't. So why would you build a company without having an acquirer when you start?
Exactly.
It's the same, it's the same thing. So I tell the startups, I'm like, your KPIs are to make sure that your ICP and persona, your ideal customer profile and persona, match that of your acquirer, we call attachment rate. Then you go out and find a bunch of their customers and you get those customers to prove the attachment rate. And then you can move towards an exit. Because if you go out and get a bunch of customers that aren't a match, they're going to be like, what's the big risk for a corporate buying another company? One of them is the customer attachment rate. Are their customers going to buy your product? You don't want a question mark there. So what you do is you start with that and you
Mm.
build to their customers. Your ICP needs to be your acquirer's ICP and persona. And if you
Yeah.
build to that, you're proving the whole way. So I even tell my startups, I'm like, listen, I want you to find 100 of their customers. I want you to document this. Find 100 of their customers. I want you to see how many you can get. If you get half of them, you can say, I have 50% attachment rate. So acquire, how many customers do you have? They're like a million. So that's 500,000 customers at the current attachment at 1,000 a month. Now you have a value. I've sold companies with 2 million in revenue for 50 million because of that number, right? I'm working on one of them right now. It's huge. So they want to buy you before you get too expensive, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, well, keep writing it out, writing it out." The closer you get to the peak, you're taking their margin,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So they want to buy it earlier so they have that upside. Plus, there's a benefit in blue sky. They don't know what the answer is. The closer you get, the more you give them the answer, the less you have room for negotiation. So you start out with this acquirer in mind. You start with that, right? This is the people who are going to buy it. This is what I'm building it for. Here are their customers. Then you go back to your product and you engage with their customers. And you put together a user advisory board and an industry advisory board. The industry advisory board includes the potential acquirers, and the user advisory board includes the customers that you're trying to sell that are in their ICP. And then
Mm.
you build the product with them. When those people convert, when those users convert to customers, you have validation, right? So there's a process to get through from that where you avoid all these pitfalls that founders make over and over that is just so hard to watch all the time. I it's hard to watch it. I see it and I'm like, oh my God, if they just knew this, it would have been okay. And they've lost their family's money and all this. And it's just really, all it is one little thing,
Yeah.
you know?
It's a little thing that's a big thing. And I appreciate that you said that. I have had this debate on air with founders about start with the in mind. And I wholeheartedly agree. Like I would hug you through the podcast because I invest in startups and
Uh,
I will ask the founder, what is your exit strategy? It's one of the first questions I ask them. And then not just like, are you going public or are you going to be acquired, but who are your top 3 acquisition partners? Are you in that ecosystem yet? If not, why aren't you there? Right. And you look at some of the big companies that are gobbling up companies right now, whether it's Microsoft or some of the other technology companies that are, whether they want it for the IP or they want it because of expanding user base or whatever the different reasons are. But people have to be clear. You said something really interesting, Gregory. Like everything is super interesting, but you said we put the ecosystem into software.
mhm.
How did founders access that
Oh
software?
yeah. Yeah. My website is gregoryshepard.com and you just click on visionaries and it's free. Like all the education's free. You can just go in there. It's my gift to founders. So, I spent a lot of money on this. The programming are 8-minute micro learning courses, and you can
Mhm.
learn like valuation. How does it work? Market sizing. How does it work? And there's even tools in there. We have like 200,000 investors that match up to you. You can build a profile for free. That's like a pitch deck, a digital website pitch deck. There's grants in there. There's I think over $1 million in incentives for software, which is the first thing that founders can buy. There's pitch events. There's every community in the world in there. There's I mean, I'm trying to take the whole startup ecosystem and put it into one platform. And then we license that to universities, accelerators. We have big universities. I co-founded the Fulbright Entrepreneur Initiative. Fulbright is the largest, academic institution. We're putting together like $1 billion to give to founders for seed money, just like they do for scholarships. Um, and it's all circled around ESG, environmental sustainability and inclusion stuff, right?
Mhm.
To help marginalized people solve the world's problems and starting with their own, right? By empowering them with this education. And so that's the one that I have goes with the book. But you can just go to gregoryshepard.com and click on visionaries and you can get in for free and just knock yourself out. Um, I mean, it's everything you need. And if it's not in there, then hit the button and tell me what you need and I'll put it in there. you know, um, so it's a huge project. We power like big, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Hebrew University, which is like the Harvard of the Middle East. We're all over the world. And we power Startups for Africa, the Black Entrepreneurs Project, like 70 nonprofits, for them to help with marginalized people. So, blind, deaf, wheelchair, I hate to say handicap, but, because I don't like when people call me handicapped, um, but people that have challenges that our regular society doesn't handle, those people are perfect entrepreneurs, perfect entrepreneurs. Because like me, they couldn't go out and get a regular job. So you just learn how to build your own job, you know?
Yeah.
So that's
That,
that.
I'm very, very never like I'm never at a loss for words, but the generosity of that, Gregory, is massive. And talk about legacy, because there are founders in your space that are not in legacy mode, but everything you're talking about in this show is all around legacy, is all around contribution, is all around making a difference. And that's why I asked you that question earlier. It's like, how can we change this? Because I know it's your heart and your heart's work, not just your life's work, to change this for DEI. And when I say DEI, it's like, again, it's one of those terms we're using broadly, but
Mm,
it because I live it, right? And
mhm,
I know, like you, what it's like to be beaten up and kicked in the stomach and punched in the face and to be bullied because I was different. And you just said something so beautiful, which is that we make better founders. We're resilient,
mhm,
right? We are resourceful. and
We
we
got grit.
become we got grip,
Yeah.
we're tough. As we
Yeah.
come to the top of the show, I want to when I have a fellow founder on who has an 80s throwback reference, I love to ask a few questions of a bit of the nostalgic nature if you're ready.
Yeah.
So, when did you get your first computer or have access to your first computer and start to write code or play with
Uh,
it?
in like the 80s,
Yeah.
like
Do
when
you remember
DOS
what
came
it
out.
was?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was DOS, and I wrote a basically a CRM because I was doing sales for this company that I was starting, and I had all these 3x5 cards in a big long box, and on the back I had the cross streets and notes on the other side, and then who the people were I was calling on, like the gatekeepers, like what was her name, what was her favorite color, how many kids did she have, what was her favorite flower, and then I would go and prepare, and I would use that as it was a CRM. And then I started writing my own CRM in DOS, and I was like, "This is amazing," you know. And then when Windows and Apple came out, I was just like, "Oh my God, oh my God," And I was like, "This is my life." And then when the internet came out, I was like, "Okay, I'm done. I'm doing the internet from now on."
Right. I just had the founder of art.com on the show, and he bought that domain. They acquired it in 94. We were talking about the seeing the internet and just kind of going, okay, this is going to be huge, right? And
Yeah,
in the 80s, my dad gave me I had that I was doing early coding. First it was basic, and then it was DOS, and
yeah,
I was taking the Dungeons and Dragons books,
uh-huh,
Gregory, and I was like, I wonder if I can make this, because it was a decision tree. We had graphic, no graphics, right? So it was like, could I make this into like a word game? And it was like, this is the best, because I was a kid who, because I was bullied, I didn't like to go to the playground. I didn't, I was
yeah.
very
That was like
socially awkward.
dangerous.
Yeah, it was
War
dangerous.
zone. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like you'd rather catch rattlesnakes than go to the playground because that's
yeah,
safer.
yeah. Stay where the teachers are.
Stay where the teachers are.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, Gregory, you personally, I can't wait to read your book, and just thank you for your beautiful heart. And my final question is, my son listens to our show, and I would love for you to share your best piece of advice for someone who's listening who maybe is on the autism spectrum, of some degree of spectrum, or learning different. I don't like disability. I prefer to say
Yeah.
difference, just learning differently. What advice do you want to give to
Well,
them?
to your point, neurodivergent is neuro is brain and divergent is different brain, right?
Yeah.
So we are different. It's a different operating system. It's not a it's just our software runs differently, right? The hardware is the same, but the software runs differently. I have scans on my website that show my brain scanning scans while I'm thinking about things compared to atypical people or normies.
Mm.
It's pretty astounding. And that's not just me. There was hundreds of autistic people looking at pictures with hundreds of neurodivergent or neurotypical people. And you can see that we are very different. So the trick is for us is to find out where our what is where's our little superpower, right? So when people don't understand autism, I always explain it as like a crayons. You have this big box of crayons, and every color represents one neurodivergent condition, and the length of the crayons vary, right? So one crayon could be yellow and it could be really long. Another one could be green, it could be short.
Mm.
The spectrum is all of the colors together, like a color spectrum. And each one of those things is one neurodivergent condition. And so, that's why if you met one autistic person, you've only met one because the varieties are they range as much as every person on the planet. So, sensory disorders, right? And autism is where you have all of them. If you don't have all of them, then you have neurodivergence in one of them, right? So, when you have all of them, you have to start saying, okay, well, this one is hard for me. This one is easy for me. Whatever the ones are that are easy for you are usually your superpowers because they're just, you don't even have, like, you just think that way, you don't have to try. So for a long time in school, they were trying to teach me the way that the way everybody else learns in the things that they all learn. And I just couldn't do it because it was like a swimming upstream. Like my brain just didn't work that way until I started to figure out myself how I think and what I am good at. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I'm a freaking genius. I mean, that
Mhm.
sounds arrogant, but you know what I mean, right? Like, didn't want to make that sound that way, but
It
you know,
didn't
you,
sound arrogant coming from you.
okay. So I was nervous when I said, I was like, oh no, but,
No, no.
um, but you find those things and you're really good. And some of the processing disorders that we have are that one crayon is really long, meaning you're like really good at it. And another one is small, but you have to function you have to translate. So the way we get the information in our brain and the way we process it, and then we have to get it back out in words. And that transition of those three stages creates a lot of challenges for us. But what happens with us is a lot of the stuff happens in our brain. So it's people judging the way that we export the information is not the right way of thinking about it, right? Like we can seem like we're not paying attention and be looking around and like we do a lot. And we get the information and we're processing like really hardcore and we understand it really well. Just because we can't explain it to you doesn't mean we don't understand it, you
Yeah.
know? So we have to get into situations where you can work with people that understand neurodivergent thinking and where you can get the information and work with it yourself in the way that you need to work with it. And then the challenge is exporting it out to other people the way that they need to see it. It's like translating, you
Like
know?
we need a GitHub repository.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, where my mind goes is, and I have not been diagnosed, but where my mind goes is like, oh, Microsoft Copilot integrates it to GitHub. And if we could just do translational, like, anyway, we won't even go
Yeah,
down
that's
that road.
exactly the kind of stuff. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I mean, like, yes, it's totally that's how it is, right? When you think about when you have a machine and you have to put data in, you type it in, or it gets it from other people that typed it in at some point. When you're a
Yeah.
human, you get it through your ears, your eyes, your nose, your touch, and your taste, your senses. So if you're autistic, you're getting the data in sometimes too much. Like, we don't like to be touched sometimes, or music can be loud, or lights. Those are sensory things, right?
Mhm.
So you have to realize that the information is coming in the channels that we can absorb the information, not all of them like you.
Yeah.
Then we have to reassemble that in our own brain, and that causes a different way of thinking about things. And then we have to translate that and then put it into words. And we think in dimensions. Like I think in these crazy dimensions, and then I have to like break it down into words, which are super linear, and it doesn't have like dimensions. And it really sucks, because I'm like trying to explain something that is not flat. It's more like cubed, right? But you can only words, it's one word at a time. It's like linear, and you can't do more than one path at the same time. And so it takes forever to try to unpack complicated thoughts. It drives me crazy, and it drives my wife crazy too.
And to that point, things like GPT-4 for me personally changed my life because it helps me organize thoughts. And I
Yeah.
realized, Gregory, recently at 51 that I don't read left to right. I have to work to read left to right, but when I'm tired, I read right to left. And
Huh.
so math was never my friend. I failed calculus the first time because I was copying the formulas down incorrectly. And so like things like that, but now I love math because I can learn it differently, right?
Yeah.
And so I love the crayon analogy you gave. You are just such an incredible human, and
Oh,
I
thank
hope
you.
that you know that. And this show has just touched my heart. And for all the listeners, please, 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 if you know someone who is neurodivergent, please share the show with them. Gregory, you're an inspiration, and you are literally changing the world. And for startup founders like myself, I'm so grateful. I'm just so grateful for everything you're doing. So thank you for being on the show.
Oh, wow. That's very kind. Thank you. It's my honor. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. All right, everyone. Well, wherever you are in the world, we are sending you much love. God bless. Go rock your day. And again, if the show has been helpful, please give us a 5-star review and share the show. And with that, I will see you in the next episode.
Are you currently an employee looking to start your own business? Maybe you've been thinking about it for a while and you're just not sure where to start. Well, my course, Employee to Entrepreneur, combines my decades of experience as an entrepreneur with proven methods, techniques, and skills to help you take that leap and start your own business. This course is self-paced, learn on demand, and comes with an incredible workbook. And that will allow you to go through this content piece by piece by piece, absorb it, take action, and then go on to the next module. So check out my course on susansly.com, Employee to Entrepreneur.